So good evening, everybody. After the learning, for that matter, was even divided into two classes, the Sharbalat, the gateway into Tanya, will immediately begin with the first chapter, Tanya B'Seif Perek Gimel Dini, that we learned in the third chapter of the Tractate Nida. Now, I will note that perhaps as a claimer over here will establish in this class that despite we know that Tanya, there's such depth in every single, not only sentence, line, but literally in every word of the Alter Rebbe. This is indeed the magnum opus of the Alter Rebbe himself, which wrote almost 50 Sfarim on Chassidus, additional to his famous Shulchan Aruch Harav. But in Chassidus, this was the center sefer of the Alter Rebbe, and understandably, and as well as we mentioned, that this is considered the Torah Shebiksav of Torah Chassidus, the written Torah, the central iconic writings and work of the entire Chassidus. So we could appreciate it even on the surface that there's depth in every single word, but more so, we know from the Alter Rebbe himself the precision of choice of words, terminology, verbiage, the precise expression, the precise calculated expression of the Alter Rebbe in when he wrote what, the reason why he wrote this word over another word, and even the word itself, with its central meaning, what he added before and after to that very word. So we know it from the Alter Rebbe himself. The Alter Rebbe said that it's an expression of the Alter Rebbe regarding the 41st chapter. The 41st chapter begins, the second line, or the 41st chapter begins, Reishis Ha'avodah v'Ikra v'Sharsha, where the Alter Rebbe speaks about Kabbalah Seil, accepting the yoke of Hashem, as the primary service or the primary basis of a Yid's service to his Creator. So the Alter Rebbe himself testifies that, I believe it was in the word V'Ikra v'Sharsha, that the message could come across with a vav or without a vav. In the word V'Ikra, that it's a center point in this, it's a central spirit of, it ought to be the central spirit of our entire Avodas Hashem, this whole idea of Kabbalah Seil, accepting the yoke of Hashem, again, as it's explained in the 41st chapter, so it could be read, Reishis Ha'avodah Ikra v'Sharsha, or Ve'ikra v'Sharsha. We're not going to go into the difference, it's a very nuanced difference, but the Alter Rebbe, namely, and what we're getting at, is that the Alter Rebbe himself testified that he spent 6 weeks repeating in his mind multiple times the entire Tanya to come to a decision how he should write that word, Ikra or V'Ikra. This gives us a little bit of an insight, a tiny insight, into the enormous energy, even if you will, investment of the core soul of the Alter Rebbe in this sefer. And as much as we can appreciate any person putting in 6 weeks in contemplation to what word to write, what word, or how to write a particular word, in this case, is just with a vav or not a vav, that itself tells us the significance of every word of a sefer compiled by anybody. I mean, anybody, even somebody who is a Torah Yid, who is a divine Torah Yid, if he puts in 6 weeks in doubting or in deciding how he's going to write a word, tells us how much he invested in every single word of a sefer. But in this case, we're talking about the Alter Rebbe. We have to appreciate it in the most elemental manner that the Alter Rebbe's mind was an extremely deep mind, besides him being a tzaddik, a divine human being. we know it just from what the Alter Rebbe, who he was, and his knowledge, his unprecedented knowledge. We mentioned, I believe, in the previous class as well, his unprecedented knowledge, different history, the parts of history, the Alter Rebbe, his unprecedented knowledge, not only Achad B'Dor in his generation, and unique in his knowledge in his own generation, in comparison to the many Ge'onim, true Ge'onim of his own generation, but even in comparison to many, many generations prior to the Alter Rebbe, or perhaps even a unique mind, a unique figure, unique in comparison to perhaps all generations. It justifiably said of the Alter Rebbe, famous expression of the Ge'onim of his own city when he was the youngest of age, said Rav Tano Pali, which is expression on Rav, which categorically was an Ameira, but he had the ability to argue on Tanoim because of his status, who he was. It was expression of the Alter Rebbe, Rav Tano Pali. But what we're just getting at over here, the Alter Rebbe's mind was, even again before you introduce the Alter Rebbe's piety, his tzidkus, his connection to the divine as a divine yid. Before that, the Alter Rebbe's mind was a very deep mind. The Alter Rebbe's mind was not like any other mind of even an average Goin. And if the Alter Rebbe, some mind like the Alter Rebbe, had to put in investing 6 weeks to write a letter Ikra or Ve'ikra, to an average person, it's like maybe 1,000 years, without exaggeration. To a Goin, it's like years, or even in comparison to other months. No question, the Alter Rebbe's 6 weeks was something which was, no question, you can't compare. In the most simple understanding, just a simple understanding, we have the Alter Rebbe of, again, what we know about the great Ge'onis and depth and profundity of the Alter Rebbe's mind. We could definitely appreciate even a little bit what does it mean 6 weeks of someone like, with a mind of the Alter Rebbe. What does this all tell us? That every word in Tanya was precisely the choice of words, and every word in every sentence, every line, every word is chosen with precision. As such, there is so many layers on every single idea, and again, even phrase, line, and even word on Tanya. And much has been written. Hundreds of pages have been written over the generations, explaining different expressions of the Alter Rebbe. Why he chose this word, why he chose this word, why he didn't choose another word, or a pasuk, or why this pasuk comes before, when the Alter Rebbe would bring different proofs of one idea from multiple verses, which one would say, you have a few verses, throw them all in. But no, the Alter Rebbe chose these verses over other verses, which on the surface could have been perhaps on the surface a better proof, but the Alter Rebbe chose this verse, and even the order to which the Alter Rebbe brought these verses was also it was also with precision. I will just say, our Rebbe, with his writings on the Tanya, extrapolated this precision of the Alter Rebbe more than anybody else who wrote of the Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's Tanya. And in different ways, you see even the Rebbe's, towards the end of the Tanya, the very early years, the Rebbe wrote the Maftech Inyonim. You see clearly how the Rebbe appreciated the Alter Rebbe's precision in the way he wrote, and again, choice of words, choice of psukim, order in Tanya, and so on and so forth. And the Rebbe again had wrote of the lessons in Tanya, which was primarily a Yiddish production in Yiddish by a shir of Tanya, which was given over the radio. The Rebbe wrote a lot of ha'aris on that, marks, footnotes on those shiurim, which were later printed. But later we found from the Rebbe's Rishimus, much what he wrote on Tanya, which you can definitely understand. It was something that Rebbe shed a new light, which the Rebbe extrapolated this precision of the Alter Rebbe's precise choice of expression, his wording, and so on and so forth. So that tells us that really there's so many layers in every word, even every word of Tanya. But we will, as I say, a claimer, what we will do though is we will learn the Tanya the way it is. If periodically we'll, if it can contribute to the understanding or to the flow of the Tanya, we will perhaps maybe add a bit of flavor of this which is written again of the Tanya. But namely, the shir will be, the class will be namely on the just to simply understand this which. Say recently heard the most perfect, we mentioned it perhaps in the previous classes as well, the introduction, in the Sharblat, a perfect manual, the perfect manual to life, and therefore we will try to understand it in a way that to the maximum of our ability to try to understand and explain it, or rather explain it to the maximum of our ability based on the simple meaning. And again, each one can go and find more and more which is written on the Tanya to find appreciate the many layers which exist in every sentence, and perhaps in every word in Tanya, which again, so much is written. But we will, nonetheless, this class will be just simply to understand the meaning and the message of the Alter Rebbe on this simple surface, in pshutim, the simple meaning and the simple flow, or follow the simple meaning of the chapters, simple meaning of the wording over here, and which we're able to again move on and move forward. We don't know how long this would take, because learning Tanya, there's always just by learning Tanya, there's always to appreciate the Alter Rebbe's message. A lot of has to be sometimes explained, and but we will try to this class itself won't be a class of dissecting every word and every idea. Again, everybody's invited to go see. There's so many Sfarim on Tanya. We will just follow the text and with the text and its simple meaning and explanation. So we'll just mention though Tanya itself. We know Tanya, the Alter Rebbe began this important magnum opus of his with the word Tanya. Lots have been written on that itself, because even in say Peri Gimel Denida, there's different versions. There's a version which says Tanan as opposed to Tanya. Why did the Alter Rebbe choose this version of Tanya over Tanan? One is like a Braisa, one is Tanan is a Mishnah, Tanya is a Braisa. We know the difference of the Mishnah, Mishnayos and Braisas. Why did Alter Rebbe choose this version, even though it seems to, when you learn there in the Gemara, it seems that the other version of Tanan is more the acceptable for multiple reasons. And it says that the Alter Rebbe, with this word, and again, many reasons why the Alter Rebbe began, but one of the reasons the Alter Rebbe began Tanya has, if you reconfigure these letters of Tanya, you have the word Eson, which the Alter Rebbe, Eson means strength. Stoka Kenachal Eson, which is a pasuk. Eson is about strength. It says the Avis of Rav Yitzchak Yaakov were called Esonim Meisei Aretz, the establishers of the land. Esonim were the Avis were called Esonim. The Tanoim were called Esonim, and for that matter, also you reconfigure the letters of Esonim. You find Tanoim. They were the ones who established Teda Shebal Peh. So the Alter Rebbe here was, again, so much is written in Tanya. There was the counterpart of the important Kedusha which the Alter Rebbe revealed, or the Alter Rebbe brought about to this world, and ultimately embedded the information of Tanya, which was supposed to counter a particular type of klipa, which was associated with the Eson, but namely or Tanya, in other words, similar to this. It was the counterpart to the energy which the Alter Rebbe brought about through the Tanya, but the Eson, namely the Alter Rebbe, was here to reveal the Eson of the Neshama, because there's so many layers of the Neshama itself. We know the Neshama, Chamisha Shemis Nikrullah, the Neshama has 5 names, and each name is another level, going deeper and deeper into the Neshama, till you have the Yechida of the Neshama, which is associated with the Yachid, Yechid Yachdim, one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as it says in many places in Chassidus. That's where that natural, instinctive expression of every single Yid to be Meiser Nefesh, to give up his life for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because in the deeper core levels of his neshama, he is essentially one with Hashem, as a famous expression of the Alter Rebbe himself, Hayid nishtar vil and nishtar ken sein abgerissen for the Mebischen. Hayid, not he wants to, and not even he can be separated from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He can never sever his tie with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that comes from the core of the neshama, the yechid of his neshama, which is yechida liyachtoch, the expression of in the Hishana Rabbah davening, that yachid, he is part of Hashem's reality, so he cannot. You can't rip yourself away from yourself. You cannot sever relationship with yourself, because you are you. So to a Yid is part of the Yachid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so he can't, by definition of who he is, disconnect himself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Alter Rebbe here was coming to extract or to point out that a son of the neshama, the deepest parts of the neshama, which ultimately becomes, again, through the Alter Rebbe's, the information that the Rebbe shares with us, identifying this part of the neshama, identifying our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, coming through in so many different ways throughout the entire Tanya, that brought about, that revealed that Eson, that strength, the enormous strength of the neshama, which the neshama possesses, which ultimately the kikariv Torah mitzvahs would become close and very close to the person, and this is what he would live for, strive for. In other words, overtly, his passionate would be in Torah and mitzvahs, justifying the term of the pasuk kikariv elecha davar ma'id. That Torah is not only something we do, but something which we appreciate in ways that it's truly close to us, and ma'id, very close to us, which is, again, the Alter Rebbe said he's here to explain that, as we mentioned in the introduction, that on the surface it doesn't seem that it's really close to the Yid. We ought to do it. We ought to commit ourselves to Torah mitzvahs, but to say it's close to us, that we're naturally passionate about Torah mitzvahs. Yes, from the core essence of our neshama, that's all it wants. It wants Hashem, it wants His Torah, it wants His mitzvahs. And the Alter Rebbe here in the Tanya, again explaining this pasuk, was here to reveal to us, to tell us about our own Eson of our own neshama. And Eson beginning with the Aleph, in other words, the strength of our neshama. The Eson beginning with the Aleph, which this is one of the reasons Alter Rebbe chose the version of Tanya over Tnan. Again, there's so much written on this very first word of Tanya, but we will go on. So, just a note over here, you can see the corresponding English text as well. But before even Tanya, the Alter Rebbe calls the Sefer Likutei Amorim, and we explained also definitely a demonstration of the Alter Rebbe's humility, despite the unprecedented information, this revolutionary, unprecedented information which the Alter Rebbe reveals to us in Tanya. He humbly calls the Tanya Likutei Amorim, a collection of sayings which he heard from his masters, which he gathered from different Svarim. Again, we spoke about this when we learned the introduction, and also Sefer Shel Beinanim, which was a very, even if you will, an audacious type of statement of the Alter Rebbe, or calling it Sefer, not a Sefer of Tzaddikim, different than the classic Musar Sefer, that you ought to be a tzaddik, you have to be that great tzaddik and climb to that level of tzaddik, and if you're not doing that well, and so on. The Alter Rebbe writes that this whole Sefer is called Sefer Shel Beinanim because the primary objective of the Yid is not necessarily to be the tzaddik, it's to be the Beinani. But we will understand, make no mistake, Beinani, as we mentioned as well, Beinani is not somebody who just sins a little, does a little mitzvah, sins a little bit. The average person, as Dr. Rebbe will prove in this very first chapter, that a Beinani is somebody who never sins, because when somebody sins, even not only in action, in speech, even in thought, Hashem says we have to be careful with our thoughts. So when a person violates, in other words, deliberately entertains his mind with this, which Hashem says not to entertain his mind with, he was violating the Ratzon Hashem. And when you violate the will of Hashem, categorically, one is called a Rasha. You can't have that status of a Beinani. And the Alter Rebbe himself is going to bring from different Gemaras that even somebody deviates not only one mitzvah, but even a mitzvah, say, a rabbinic prohibition, violates a rabbinic prohibition, or even things which seem to be lighter, categorically is called a Rasha. Beinani is somebody who never sins, nor in action, nor in speech, nor in thought. And one would right away ask, so what in the world is the difference between him and a tzaddik? We'll get to that as well. And Bezos Hashem. But nonetheless, Alter Rebbe says that we are meant to be Beinanim. Our first strive is to be, our primary strive is to be the Beinani. Eleho kol adam yimshach, a unique expression of Alter Rebbe in the beginning of the 14th chapter, that kol adam, every yid, every person, Eleho, to the level of Beinani, yimshach, he should draw himself, not necessarily the tzaddik. Again, as we'll explain, Alter Rebbe in Perek Yudaled explains, or a number of what is the tzaddik, and we can also have moment type of tzaddik sensations, idea of prayer. But again, not to jump the gun over here, we will begin the first the Perek Aleph. It says Tanya b'Seif Perek Gimel Denido, and again, this is the reason why he calls it Sefer Shel Beinanim. He calls the entire Sefer a Sefer of Beinanim, because this is the Alter Rebbe's one of the main messages, revolutionary messages of the Alter Rebbe, that Eileho, to the level of a Beinani, Kol Adam Yimshach, we ought to draw ourselves to, and not, again, necessarily the Avodah of the Tzaddik. So Perek Aleph, we begin Tanya b'Seif Perek Gimel Denido. We learned in the end of the third chapter of the tractate Nida Mashbim may say that we make him swear. Who is the him? So the Gemara is talking about the neshama as it enters into Olam Hazeh. The neshama, before it comes to Olam Hazeh, it's chatzuva mitachas kisi hakol. It's part of it, or it's carved from. In other words, because it's part of the experience of the kisi hakol, the holy throne of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The neshama is in Gan Eden before, and the Eibishter takes the neshama and says, now you're going on a shlichus, now you're going on a mission. I have a mandate for you to bring Elokus all the way down there in this Olam Hazeh, in this physical world, which despite it's a creation from the same creator who created Olam Haba, created Gan Eden, the same creator created the Olam Hazeh, but he created this physical world in a way that Elokus is hidden, is obscure, it's concealed, it's covered up, and godliness is not manifest, godliness is not overtly identified. And the neshama is here this is the mission of the neshama, to identify the Elokus, to reveal the Elokus to itself, its society, and ultimately the entire world. And this was Hashem had a whole reason why Hashem created such a type of world, is in order for because in such a world, and tells the Yid, go and illuminate, go and identify the godly reality which is embedded in creation, and even more so draw a deeper godly reality and introduce it into this creation of this world, is because Hashem had a taiva. We're not going to go into it right now. The Alter Rebbe himself later, in chapters later in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe deals with the reason for which Hashem created this whole idea, or established this whole idea. Why did He do so? Why did He create such a world devoid of overt elokus? And then, despite everything is, by definition, extension of Hashem or part of Hashem, why did Hashem create it in such a way that it would obscure the reality of God, of Himself, and then send the neshama to turn on the lights and show and demonstrate again to himself and to the world around him of this reality of Hashem through his learning Torah and doing mitzvahs? Why did He do that? Because, again, in brief, the Alter Rebbe himself elaborates later on this, the reason for creation. But in brief, Nisaba Kodesh Baruch Hu Hashem wanted a dwelling place in this very physical world. So He sends them. So who is doing this? Who does Hashem entrust in order to bring about this covet of His, this desire of His to make this world a dwelling place and an abode for Him, capital H for Hashem, is the neshama. we could only appreciate it. It's a very big tsar that says a number of svarim. It's a great tsar, even alluding to in Teresh Balpeh and Gemara. It's a great difficulty, it's a great pain, and we could only appreciate it. And understandably, it's a great pain for the neshama to leave this experience of Gan Eden, to leave this godly experience of immersed or surrounded by or appreciation on a constant basis of the godly reality, and to come into a world which is devoid of the godly reality. In other words, devoid of the revelation, devoid of the manifestation of the godly reality. So it's a great tsar for the neshama. So it's a great pain for the neshama. It's a difficulty for the neshama. The neshama is, it says a number of places, the neshama is to be told or introduced a bit of the virtue of coming down to this world, even over staying, basking in the presence of Ziv Ashchina, like it says in Neshamas Yeshvim v'nenim Ziv Ashchina. No, they bask in the pleasures of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the delight of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the neshama is taken, is ripped away from that experience and said, you're going down, and here you have an entire mandate to be megala, to reveal and identify again the Elokus, learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, disseminating the word of Hashem, and so on. So additional to this, which neshama is introduced, of the virtue of coming down to Olam Hazeh, mashbim, I say. They make the neshama take an oath to hate tzaddik, that you are meant to be a tzaddik. In other words, that you're going to be a tzaddik, v'al tihi rasha, and you shouldn't be a rasha. Now, this is the oath of the neshama before it comes down. Be a tzaddik and do not be a rasha. And the Braisa, the Tanya, in this statement continues in the Tractate of Nida, the end of the third chapter of the Tractate of Nida. It says, even though the entire world tells you you're a tzaddik, that in your eyes you should be a rasha. In other words, you ought to strive to be a tzaddik. Ti tzaddik, this is part of the oath. And al ti rasha, don't be a rasha. Why do they make the neshama take an oath? Because once you come in here, with all good intentions, it doesn't come natural. It's an important exertion and an effort a person has to place on himself and in his own routine to be aligned with the Ratzon Hashem for the 120 years, or even Yemei Eitz Yemei Ami or Chaim Nitzchim, the entire time of a Yid in this world, to be aligned perfectly with his mandate, which is ultimately the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is not something not so simple, as we all know it. So just like when you want to tell somebody to do something which is not simple, it's an effort, it's an exertion. So what do? You make the person take an oath, because what an oath does, it kind of puts the matter places the matter in a much deeper level of the person's neshama, or his consciousness. It enters into very deep subconscious levels, and therefore it's easier, or it makes it more attainable for the person to implement even a difficult task. It's the whole point of an oath. Then a Parshas Vayichi, for example. Again, that itself, we have to understand, why did Yaakov make Yosef swear? Wasn't it Yaakov would have been sufficient if Yaakov apparently would have told Yosef? But again, there's an answer to that. But what do we see in the simple pasuk is that Yaakov knows that it could be complicated for Yosef as the viceroy of Egypt to take his remains and bring it up to Eretz Yisrael. So what does he do? He makes Yosef swear. And the simple reason, the simple meaning of this is that when he swore, he felt much more obligated to do so, despite all the challenges he had, which he did have. For that matter, the Gemara tells us even Pari was skeptical. It was just because, in the end, it's only because he swore to Yaakov. That's why Pari let go. And again, the Medrash tells us an interesting incident, but this is a simple meaning, because it's a great task. It's complicated. So we all know it. To be perfectly aligned with our mandate 24/7, the entire year and all the years that a person lives in this world. And therefore, mashbim, I say, they make the neshama take an oath. And what is the oath? Take tzaddik, val tirasha, be a tzaddik, and don't be a rasha. But yet, They tell the neshama, even you're pursuing and you're doing all the good stuff, and therefore kol olam kulei, all your surroundings, the entire world is telling you you're a tzaddik. It says, in your eyes, you should be a rasha. Like in your eyes, you should always feel that inferior. You didn't get there yet, so work harder. That's the simple meaning. So the Rebbe says it could start with tzarich lahavin. He asks a question, and the question is, we have to understand that Tanan Avos Perik Beis, we learned in Avos Perik Beis, in the second chapter of Avos. We learned in the second chapter of Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers. What did we learn there? That Al Tihi Avos Perik Beis, the second chapter, Al Tihi Rasha B'fnei Atzmacha. Don't be a Rasha in your eyes. So the first thing the Alter Rebbe asks, this is a clear contradiction, black and white contradiction. One Braisa should tell us, one message of Teresh Bapeh should tell us, be in your eyes like a Rasha. And another message in Mishnayos and Avos should tell us, don't be in your eyes ever like a Rasha. So that's a contradiction, a clear black and white contradiction. But the Alter Rebbe goes further. He says, besides the black and white contradiction between two Mishnahs, or Bryce and a Mishnah, there is another issue over here. That the Rebbe says, in essence, there is virtually a problem with each one of these messages. So not only there is the contradiction says even one seems to resonate more than the other, it's still a contradiction. How could you say in one Braisa like this, another Mishnah like this? What are you meant to do? But the Alter Rebbe says, in essence, there's a problem with both of them on their own merit. In other words, if you look at each message without even being a contradiction with another message, it seems problematic. Why so? Because even if you're going to be a Rasha in your own eyes, it'll be difficult for you to serve God with joy, gladness, and elation of heart. Simply. Always in your mind, you're a Rasha. Means you're no good. One way or another, Rasha means I'm no good. So how can I be excited to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in my service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So one would say, okay, don't be so excited. Just do what you ought to do without the excitement, without the joy. No. We know that simcha, joy, and gladness, and elation of heart is an integral part of our service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It says, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. When we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which we're commanded to demonstrate that service on a constant basis. Ivdu es Hashem. But it has to be with simcha. It's part of the Avodah. The Avodah has to be with joy. We should never separate the two and say, I'll be Sameach one day. In a few years from now, I'll try to be Sameach, I'll try to be happy. Now I'll just serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No. The Pasuk says, Ivdu es Hashem. If you're serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's meant to be b'simcha. So, more so, the famous Alter Rebbe brings it in the 26th chapter. Famous word of the Arizal, Tachas Hashem Yavadet Hashem Lekech B'Simcha V'Tevivov. A pasuk written in the rebuke, and the psukim of rebuke in Torah, that you didn't serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with joy and gladness of heart. So the pasuk, there's the simple meaning is, I gave you all the good stuff, and you took advantage. You didn't serve me when you had the good stuff with you, and unfortunately now Hashem says there's going to be a change of course. That's a simple meaning. The Arizal says, if you look into the pasuk, Tachas Hashem Lekech B'Simcha V'Tevivov, that you didn't serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with joy and gladness of heart. It doesn't say you didn't serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You served HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but you didn't do it with joy and gladness of heart. That itself upsets HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now the Rizal says, and again, that this is meant to be part of the Avodah. The Rebbe mentioned many times, because Avodas Hashem ultimately encompasses our entire 24 hours, predicated on that famous Rambam, Hilchos Deis. He is serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu even when he eats, when he sleeps, when he drinks, and so on, because he's doing it for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which he puts it there in the words Kol Basechel, it's L'Shem Shamayim. If it's done for the sake of heaven, so that itself is a heavenly act. It's a heavenly action. So you're serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. Again, the Rambam himself elaborates on this idea of the Yid serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu 24/7, the entire 24 hours of the day. So the Rebbe many times points out, so in essence, we're supposed to be b'simcha every moment of the day because we're always serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So simcha in Aveda is not something which is an additional bonus. This is meant to be part of our expression of our Aveda. You're serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to be b'simcha. Now tell somebody who Torah himself is telling him, you're a Rasha. You're a Rasha. Or in my eyes, I'm a Rasha. I'm no good. So I could do what I have to do. I could have a mezuzah on my door, put on tefillin every day, even learn Torah to find the ability to concentrate on my learning, but I cannot learn b'simcha. I cannot have that joy, that gladness, that expansion, that expansion of heart, knowing that I'm supposed to be telling myself on a constant basis I'm a Rasha. So the message on its own, again, additional to being a contradiction with another Mishnah, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't go together with our mandate of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'simcha, precisely with joy. And more so, and now you go to the other statement in the Mishnah Pirkei Avos. Okay, it says Al ti rasha b'fnei atzmecha. You should never be a Rasha. You should not be a Rasha in your eyes. Which again allows us to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with joy, with elation, with gladness of heart. But yet, there could be another issue. Because when you tell somebody that don't ever be in your eyes like a Rasha, meaning to say, like whatever I do, in any situation I should never have this, even when I'm formally being this, for me, this religious Jew, observant Jew. Nonetheless, there is the bodily needs, bodily desires, bodily inclinations. There comes the animalistic inclinations, which we all know we have. We try to always stay on the right conveyor belt. But the fact that I'm told that not to be so, that I should never be a Rasha in my eyes, never be a Rasha in my eyes. In my eyes, I'm always kind of good. So that has a negative, that can have a negative result of being, so he says, the first thing he says, it says that would bring a certain sense of indifference, apathy in my Avodas Hashem. Complacency, it's all good, I'm never a Rasha. I'm always a good guy. So whatever I do, I'll try to do all the good things, but ultimately, if I fall through the cracks, I'm also good. How do I know I'm good? How do I know I shouldn't consider myself a Rasha? Because it says in the Mishnah, don't ever be a Rasha in your eyes. And it means ever. So that itself, not necessarily, it would maybe allow the person to be joyful when he serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But conversely, it allows the person to be complacent. It's okay. You're a good guy. So there's a problem in this message as well. Don't ever be a Rasha in your eyes. So what would be the correct message? Yeah, if you're doing good, serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with simcha. But when you're not so good, maybe you should think you're a Rasha. Maybe you should be able to, it'll push you to get back on track immediately. Not tomorrow and not in an hour from now, but right now. But if you tell somebody, don't ever be a Rasha in your eyes, it could come to kalos. Kalos means leniency in my submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So again, there is something problematic with that message itself, additional to the first question of the Alter Rebbe, that it's a contradiction of two sayings of our sages of blessed memory. So the Alter Rebbe continues, because we find in the Gemara 5 categories within the neshama. 5 categories among Yidden. So the first one, this is again in Gemara Brachas. The Gemara says, Tzadik v'Tevli, Tzadik v'Rali, Rasha v'Tevli, Rasha v'Rali v'Beinani. We did this line very quick, but in the end, it's 5 different experiences of different types of Yidden. So we have the Tzadik. The simple meaning of the Gemara, Tzadik v'Tevli. It's a Tzadik, a righteous person. So the first thing is v'tevlei. Things are good. Things are going good with him. That's the simple meaning of v'tevlei. Parnasa, livelihood, healthy children. He's gesund. He's healthy, and he's a tzaddik. Makes sense. Good people, a good person. He's deserving of all the good stuff. Good hashpa'as from Hashem. All the blessings from Hashem. But then the Gemara says there's another type of narrative, which is the tzaddik v'ralei. He's a tzaddik. He's a righteous person, but unfortunately he's experiencing negative experiences, difficulties, as we know it far too well. This was a question of Moshe Rabbeinu asks Hashem, and something which we never yet adequately, again, a lot of it is told to us in the Gemara, Teresh Balpeh, that a person suffers in this world. In the end, Hashem is just cleansing his, at least even his light sins, if you will, especially when it comes to a tzaddik, which usually doesn't sin, but everything is commensurate to which is demanded from a person, is always commensurate to who he is, how close he is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Alter Rebbe again points this out for that matter very clearly in the end of the 30th chapter. According to the camel, that's how much the load. It's a robust camel, you put a greater load on it. By a tzaddik, much more is demanded from the tzaddik. So even he has nonetheless slight iniquities in his avodas Hashem. It says Hashem, because of his great kindness, cleanses these iniquities in this world in order for him to come into Olam Haba without any punishment. In other words, that he takes care of the problem, he takes care of the matter in this very physical world. Again, not severe sins, because you're dealing with a tzaddik, does not have severe iniquities. But nonetheless, something even light, but in comparison to who he is, that we find classically by Moshe Rabbeinu. As the Gemara says, "Sviv of Nisar Ma'id," when it comes to those who are surrounding HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even Nisara means to say even like a little thin hair. The size of a thin hair, again, is a fragmentation in the relationship of a Yid with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But that fragmentation doesn't necessarily exist someone who's in a lower level. It's like something, you have a cut, chas v'shalom, someone has a cut on his finger, as opposed to, God forbid, that same cut in an eyeball. It's much more sensitive, and therefore the blemish, the fragmentation, is much greater. And the same thing when it comes to tzaddik. So I'm just mentioning because he's a tzaddik. But nonetheless, Raloi. So we never got to the ultimate, and appreciate adequately the explanation. Moshe Rabbeinu had the question, as a question for many have throughout all generations. But a little bit the Gemara does explain, Teda does explain, as they understood, because his great kindness takes away these small, light iniquities in this world, cleansing the neshama of this world, in order the person should come pure to the world to come. Because we know that every negative incident, or Rahman al-San experience, a Yid experiences, is not something that, tit for tat. Hashem says, you did something I didn't want you to do, I'll do something you don't want to be done to you. God forbid. That's not our God. God is a teva tevul heitiv. Everything about Hashem is good and kind. Infinite goodness. Infinite means to say that it goes beyond the petty finiteness, if you will, in a relationship which exists between two human beings. Hashem is, we say, chasdan, kind and merciful and pitiful, and so this is infinite. It's infinite. Everything in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem is Ein Sof. His Chesed is Ein Sof. His Racham is Ein Sof. His midah, his character to forgive, is infinite. Alter Rebbe beautifully, so eloquently explains this in the 11th chapter of Igeres HaTeshuvah, how even by man, two human beings, once, twice, three times, a guy repeats the same sin a fourth time, like we find by Moshe Rabbeinu. It's too much. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because his midah, his character of forgiveness is infinite, there's no difference of 1 in 1,000. Together we have to realize that we're standing always in front of this infinite Melech, a king, a Melech Malchi HaMelechim, a king of all kings, which is this has infinite power. Obviously, on our initial approach, on the onset, our submission is much deeper than on any other individual we want to impress or serve, and so on. So, So it doesn't make sense that Hashem, a kind of tit for tat type of relationship, but more so, Hashem, it says Magid Yaakov Chokov Mishpatov Yisrael, whatever the Gemara says, whatever the Medrash says, whatever Hashem tells us to do, He's careful of doing Himself. Hashem says, don't take revenge. So if Hashem tells us not to take revenge, He's certainly not taking revenge when He makes a Yid's life difficult. Basically, what it is, it's about cleansing the neshama. The neshama, when it, God forbid, sins, it becomes tainted, it becomes dirty. And as a good father, a good parent, you never want your child to be dirty. Sometimes you be candid and bold, you diaper a child, they start crying. Especially you take warmer water, or a little more than warm, may not, God forbid, dangerously hot, but something you want to cleanse them, clean them very well. The kids crying, somewhat they'd rather walk in an unclean manner than to be cleaned. Especially when you clean them thoroughly, they're only crying. So why are you doing it if they're crying? Kind of, they were satisfied before, but which parent wants the child to walk around in an unclean manner? So the parent would do whatever they can in order to clean the child, despite the child sometimes doesn't appreciate it, rather stick with the dirt. Sometimes a child would get, God forbid, glass in its foot, so they rush him to the doctor, and the doctor's standing and rubbing alcohol and trying to get, and the father's standing there, and the child is seeing, experiencing this whole procedure of the doctor, which is not comfortable. Can't believe his father brought him there, his mother brought him there. And they're standing with such complacency, perhaps, because they don't appreciate the parent brought them to a doctor, or the doctor's actions in his procedure is to get the glass out, to make them healthy, that they shouldn't be infected, that they shouldn't develop with an infection within the system within the child. But the child doesn't look at it that way. And for that matter, many times it goes back home, it doesn't wear the same shoes or slippers which it's told to, because a little piece of glass or anything can go into this foot. Not even careful, because they don't even mind that. That part they don't mind. They mind when you do the cleansing process. There's a similarity that we're kind of apathetic with the sin when it comes to the cleansing process, which in essence comes from a kind place within Hashem. Like the Alter Rebbe writes in Geras HaKodesh, in the 22nd chapter, I believe the 22nd chapter, that Imrochat Hashem Tzayas B'nei Tzion, Hashem Himself cleansing, it's a kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He Himself does the cleansing process. Like a king which wouldn't send anybody to clean his child, because the prince, he would kind of move out of there's the chain of command. The king is more of dictating and telling what ought to be done, but everybody has their position and they implement the king's edicts, the king's dictates. But when it comes to the king's own son, prince, he would go out of line and, in this case, even clean up his son, diaper his child. If you look at what Alter Rebbe is speaking, the terminology of the pasuk. So it's Hashem's kindness that He's cleaning us. Sometimes it's like rubbing alcohol, or sometimes a bit hot water. It's not something which we appreciate. But this is just because of our immature approach to what's real. The sin doesn't bother us as much as the cleansing process. But the sin is that's where the danger, that's severing the connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's the no good part. That's what we should lament and cry and be bitter of. But that sometimes we're apathetic to. And the cleansing process, that's what bothers us. We come running and so on, and then we don't know what to do with ourselves. But if you look at it categorically, it's very similar to the child. That's the good part. So it's easier said than done, as we all know it. That's why it's never adequately resonates. And again, in the greatest of the great, and therefore they always have the question, even on David HaMelech had Masa, he used to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's enough with the suffering. But back to the Gemara says, Tzaddik v'ralei, that a tzaddik, there are tzaddikim walking the face of the earth, the righteous people. The Torah says the righteous, not that someone put them a badge and it said the tzaddik. Tzaddik is a very loose word today. People write it, post on billboards or being notified. Tzaddik, there's a tzaddik came to the city. It's too much of a bunch of good people coming to encourage Eden to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. But the term tzaddik is a very exclusive term according to Torah. Tzaddik is somebody very special, so it's not someone else put a badge on them or someone putting a badge on themselves as a tzaddik. Tzaddik is a real tzaddik. Very extremely a symbol of a devout Yid to a Yid which is completely submissive in thought, speech, and action, and beyond. We're going to learn later, it's beyond that, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there are tzaddikim, not many, but they walk the face of the earth, but they suffer. Veralei. That's the simple meaning of the Gemara. Then, conversely, the Gemara says, Rasha v'tevlei. There's a Rasha that everything is good. He's living a very sweet life. He is a Rasha. Starts with Rasha v'tevlei. That he's a Rasha, he's not a good person, doesn't behave appropriately, morally, ethically. His relation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is nishta zay, as it say, not so, maybe even less than that. But everything is good in his life, in all areas of life. And again, the question why, if he's a Rasha, why I think so good? But the Gemara itself answers the same idea. He's a Rasha, and Hashem doesn't want to give him that, to cleanse him of this world, because cleansing somebody in this world is a kindness. In the end, it's worth to look in the end of the last page, the last chapter, because of Tshuva. Alter Rebbe says it's like, we see the sun goes a few feet, a meter, for example, or a few feet, a few inches in this world. Really, where the sun is, it's moving thousands and thousands of miles. Where in this world, it just goes a few inches and so on. Or you see the movement just little by little, even though where the sun is, it's moving significantly quicker than the way the movement is expressed in this world. This the Alter Rebbe says when a person goes through a little bit difficulties in this world, it takes away a lot more than if the person would need to go through these difficulties in the world to come. The Rebbe says there, if it brings that even 70 years of suffering of someone like Job, like Eve, does not compare to the one moment of suffering in the world to come. Again, it brings this analogy. So there's some advantage of being looked after in this world, and Hashem doesn't want to grant that to the Rasha. Therefore, let it be good for him. It's still difficult to understand, but at least this is the mahalach. This is what the Gemara is telling us. So then you have the Rasha v'tevlei, and you have the Rasha v'ralei. Yeah, he's a Rasha, but he's suffering. Going through a difficult time. And on the surface, this seems to be a Rasha which Hashem still, for whatever reason, has pity on him. He wants him to go through the cleansing process of this world. Or, as it says in other places, this is a worse type of Rasha, that he's so devoid of anything good or holy, divine, that there's nothing but Hashem. There's nothing good that Hashem can give him. So he's suffering in this world and in the world to come as well, as opposed to the previous Rasha, the Tevlei, because a little bit good he has, and therefore Hashem wants to give him all the good stuff in this world so he could truly be judged in the world to come. And that's really more the accepted understanding of this Gemara. And then there's the Beinani, which is someone in between. People in between, the Beinani could also have really a Beinani, the Tevlei v'ralei, in the way it's expressed in his own experience in the Selam Hazeh. But the Gemara is very brief. Beinani is the average person. So we have 5 different types of Yidden in this Gemara. So it says in the Gemara, Tzadik v'tevlei, Tzadik gomor. Tzadik v'ralei, Tzadik she'eni gomor. The Gemara explains why this Tzadik things are good with this Tzadik and the other Tzadik things are no good. Because one Tzadik is a Tzadik gomor. He's a complete Tzadik, so there's no reason there's nothing to cleanse him. So not in the world to come, not even in this world, because he's a perfect tzaddik. So there's nothing to clean up. as opposed to the one, the tzaddik suffering, he's incomplete. He's a tzaddik, but he's incomplete tzaddik. So he has a bit of stuff that Hashem had got to get rid of. So Hashem, because he's such a great tzaddik, Hashem said, let's get rid of it in this world, that he should be able to come pure in the world to come. This is the meaning, this is the Gemara explaining this, why the two tzaddikim, one having a difficult time and one not. But Rai Mehemna, Parshas Mishpatim Pirush, tzaddik v'ralei sharash bei kofet l'teiv, and Rai Mehemna, which is a sefer written by Moshe Rabbeinu, he was called the Faithful Shepherd, which is a sefer kind of the esoteric, deeper elements within Torah. Starting again, it says even Avram, it says Adam Rishon, who wrote Sefer Yetzirah. There's a Sefer Avram, there's a Adam. In other words, the whole idea of the esoteric part of Torah didn't begin by the Hasidic movement. Obviously, we know the Zohar is attributed to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. In the time of the Tanaim was a Tana, greatest Tanaim of all times. But even before that, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Rai Mehemna. And even before that, like we said, Sefer Yetzirah, but in Rai Mehemna, he teaches a bit different. He teaches tzaddik v'ralei shahra shabai kofuf l'tayv. He says that this is not referring to the experience of the tzaddik. This is referring to the type of tzaddik, this terminology, tzaddik v'tayvli, tzaddik v'ralei, not like we learned till now, or the simple meaning of the Gemara, that this is an experience of this yid, which is a tzaddik. He's having a difficult time, v'ralei, he's having only good in his life, v'tayvli. No. This is a term, an expression of who the tzaddik is. Tzaddik v'tayvli, or he starts with tzaddik v'ralei, but this is a tzaddik that has a bit of ra, a bit of no good. But loi, it's completely subordinate to who he is as a tzaddik. It's bottled, it's nullified into the grander image of who this person is. For example, take a full cup of water, put in a whole teaspoon of coffee, becoming black. Take a cup of water, put in a half a teaspoon. Okay, it's not that dark. Still see a little bit of the purity of the water, a little bit. Take a small, tiny speck of coffee, put into a big jug, or even 1 cup of water, and someone's going to ask, what is this? What is it? It's a cup of water. No, there's a speck of coffee, but you can't even notice it because it's so small. It's nullified, which means it became part of the experience of the water in a way that it's swallowed into the experience of the water. You can't even identify it. And that's what the Rai Mehemna tells us, that this is part of this is a term categorizing this here, that he's a tzaddik, but he has ra. But the ra is loy, it's so bottled, it's so overwhelmed by the toivness, if you will, that goodness, that righteousness, the piety of this this yid. Tzaddik v'ra, this ra is loy, it's kafel for bottle toiv, to the goodness of the overall goodness of this yid, this tzaddik, this true tzaddik. Then the Alter Rebbe brings another Gemara. The Gemara says, "Perik test the bracha tzaddikim yetzer teif shifta." In the Gemara, in the end, the last chapter of brachas, it says also about tzaddikim, beinim, rishayim. He says, what is the tzaddik? That the yetzer teif, the positive, the good inclination, is the one which judges them. They're the one who, on the surface, dominates them. A rasha, it says the Yitzhahara Shefton, the Yitzhahara on the surface, it means dominates them. Beinanim, it says, Zevaz Shefton, that is influenced by both. The Yitzhahara, the good inclination, and the not good inclination. And this is again a Gemara in Brachas. Omar Rab, in the same Gemara, it says, Rabbi perks up and says, Ki geina no beinani. Now that I hear that a beinanim Zevaz Shefton, that he's judged by both, meaning he's influenced, there's a certain dominance or influence by both. A Rabba says, that sounds like me, like like me. That I know Beinani. I'm a Beinani. Now remember, Rabba was the giant of his generation, and again perhaps of all generations. He was unique. He's kind. It's Gemara says, just look at the Gemara says who Rabba was. We're going to see a certain term which we have by Rabbah, which is a term which exists. Teda tells us there was many who actually experienced the same experience. But the Gemara tells us that there was, what we know about is two in all of history, David HaMelech and Rabbah. Again, Rabbah was a very grand figure. He was a tzaddik himself. So how in the world he says, I'm no Beinoni? So you're going to say, well, he was a humble guy. Well, humility, humbleness, expression of humbleness doesn't mean dishonest. A great tzaddik also has that mandate to be an honest person. It's part of who a yid is. So what, is he compromising in his honesty and he's still a tzaddik? No, it doesn't work that way. And a tzaddik, even when he's humble, he never, ever compromises on his honesty. So why would Rabbah say that? Maybe don't say anything. Let anybody figure out who you are. What does he think you're going to know Beinoni? Why did he say that? It says Moshe Rabbeinu. It says Moshe Rabbeinu was the Anam Mikol Moshe Kol Pnei Adam. He was the most humble person who walked the face of the earth. And it says a number of places, not only in his generation, but in all generations, he was humble for that yid. It says he was dafka humble for the yid who lived in the end of times. Or he stands strong with his Torah mitzvahs. Or a yid who had Mesiras Nefesh for HaKadosh. Whatever it is, he was the most humble person who walked the face of the earth. Now, when Hashem, for example, the Matan Torah experience needed to commence, needed to begin, did Moshe Rabbeinu just turn to anybody who would call this Yaakov, maybe you go up to the mountain, I don't deserve. No, he went up on the mountain because he knew he was Moshe Rabbeinu. He knew he was the Aneche Ha'emid Beinechem Ubein Elokechem. I stand in between. In other words, I'm a connecting force between Hashem and the Jewish people, Am Yisrael, and between Am Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He did everything. Because going up to the mountain to receive the luchas, to receive the Torah, didn't compromise on him being an Anov, and him being a humble person, and the most humble person who walked the face of the earth. Because humility doesn't contradict or doesn't compromise one's honesty. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that was his mandate. He never compromised his mandate. And so too when it comes to Rabbah, why did he say anything? And if he did, why would he say he's a Beinoni? He wasn't a Beinoni, he was a tzaddik. And that's what Abaye turned to him. He said, well, Abaye, he says, you're not letting anybody live. Because if you're a tzaddik, you were all consequently nothing in between. If you're a tzaddik, if you're a Beinoni, if you're a tzaddik, maybe we're Beinoni. We have a chance. But if you're a Beinoni, we are the level lower, rather. We're a shayim. So we don't stand a chance. It's as simple. He says, you're not letting anybody live.